Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California. It's delightful to have you here on the first forum or the second forum of our new series. Every year, the Cathedral chooses a theme. And this year, our theme is the Year of Healing. We've faced so many different kinds of traumas in the year 2020, and all of us are ready to start something new, to have a better experience, to get something back that we've lost. Tonight, we have the great opportunity to reflect on the current state of our country. We have somebody who knows about the presidential election intimately and has great inspiration for us as we look for the year ahead. It's Tom Steyer. Tom is a businessman and climate activist, the founder of NextGen America, which works to mobilize young people to take political action, and he was a Democratic presidential candidate. Tom, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're just so glad to have you. You must have been getting a lot of phone calls on Wednesday of last week at the presidential inauguration. I was thinking about you the whole time. I'm thinking, oh man, I wonder what you're doing. I wonder what you're experiencing. Did you watch the inauguration?
Yeah, I did.
What were you thinking about? Did you think, there but for the grace of God go I, or what was on your mind?
No. Honestly, I was so relieved to get a president back into the White House who I thought cared about Americans, was data-driven, believes that government is there to help the people, and had the experience and was putting together a team, including a Californian vice president who can really get things done and get us back on track. I honestly felt like a huge weight came off of my heart last Wednesday, and I was more relieved than I would have believed possible.
Yeah, I think in part that, January 6th incident at the U.S. Capitol building, I mean, it's just something that just seems so far beyond the pale in terms of just, what we're used to as Americans. And I think it did ramp up, the tensions. What was your take on that? I mean, you've toured the country, you've seen so many different kinds of people. What was going through your head as the Capitol building was being invaded by protesters from the far right?
Well, obviously it was terrible. I mean, obviously to have a mob attack the Capitol while chanting that they wanted to hang the vice president of the United States, seeking out different leading Congress people, including the Congresswoman who's the Speaker of the House who represents our district, is very scary. But Malcolm, to be fair, you didn't mention that I spent 2 years of my life trying to put together a movement to impeach and remove Donald Trump from the presidency. So in a terrible way, I thought that what we saw that day of him putting together that mob, inciting that mob, encouraging that mob in an attempt to overturn a free and fair American election was really on TV, a live, reality TV show of what I'd been saying for years, which is, this is who he is.
Yeah.
And as bad as it was, as terrible as it was, kind of the bottom, it was a statement about where we've come from. And it's one of the reasons I felt so relieved last Wednesday to see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris come in, that, my gosh, a decent person who cares about American, who believes in the law. It's a low bar, but honestly, it's a really.
I mean, I remember when you first started talking to me about that, and it did seem continuous with what you were worried about. It was just astonishing. But like you say, it's if he'd been more effective, I mean, he could have come closer to overthrowing the government of the United States.
Well, I think if you look at the numbers, Malcolm, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won by over 7 million votes.
Yeah.
But if you look at the numbers state by state, 44,000 votes in 3 states were the difference between a clear win and an absolute 270 tie.
Yeah.
44,000 votes. So, I mean, on the popular vote, we won by a mile. But in the Electoral College, it was very, very, very close. And I think that everybody can now see how much risk we were at if there had been another 4 years of a Trump administration, how much risk, really what the values were behind that administration, really what the behavior was. We really, saw that in the consistent 2-month attempt to overturn the election, 2-month attempt to try and push people to break the law, and then ultimately to turn violent.
Yeah. One of the things I most appreciate you about, Tom, is I when I talk to you, I feel like I get a kind of picture into what the future is going to look like. And I do remember talking to you in the days before you're kind of setting up the Impeach Now campaign. And there are ways in which you do kind of, you have like a way of seeing what's happening, what's unfolding in front of us. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you decided to do that, because when you started working on that Impeach Now work, it made you just like vilified by so many Americans, and yet so many other Americans just felt like you were our only hope. So can you talk a little bit about like how did you come to that decision of doing that Impeach Now work?
I think I felt really strongly that Donald Trump was a threat to our country, to our democracy, and to the American people. And I felt as if it is really important when someone attacks us internally that people stand up and push back. And I think of all the countries that have been flourishing democracies that have gone the wrong way.
Yeah.
And most of the time it has been in the interests of the institutional, powerful people to go along with that change. And I just felt like we cannot do that. And I honestly, you could see subsequent to this election, I mean, it was very, very clear beforehand, but subsequent to the election, he pressured people who were counting votes to lie. He pressured people to break the law. He pressured people to literally go in and intimidate Congress. He pressured his own vice president to change the outcome of the election. And so I felt originally when I started Need to Impeach, it's absolutely important when a bully shows up and everybody's scared of him, that Americans come together and push back and make it clear that we're not giving up on our values. We're not giving up on our democracy or our institutions. We're going to push back against the very powerful bullies in our country and insist on our rights. And that was really what it was. I felt like this is as bad as we're ever going to see.
Yeah.
You cannot let him get away with it and intimidate everybody. It's like, okay, got to fight back.
So when you what was your strategy in doing it, and then also what did you learn as you kind of went down that road?
Well, what I really wanted. I mean, he obviously did get impeached
twice. You have to say you were very successful.
But the first time that there was really no trial in the Senate, they just held a vote, no witnesses, no nothing, just on party lines with Mitt Romney voting to impeach.
Right, exactly.
But basically, Mitch McConnell buried it as much as he could pretty effectively.
Yeah.
And so from my standpoint, what I really wanted was I trust the American people. I trust Democrats, I trust independents, I trust Republicans. And going around the country, I'm happy. I love talking to Americans. And I don't really care if they agree with me or not, because democracy doesn't mean you agree. It means that you listen and have the best interests of the country at heart, and you come away and learn from each other. And so my attitude was, show people what he did. Show people what he did. He's a crook.
Yeah.
Put that out there, because Americans aren't crooks and they can recognize a crook. So give them the information. I'll trust them to do with it, just the way it happened when I was growing up with Richard Nixon. Right. It was originally very, very, very partisan, but then they had the Senate Watergate Committee, and Americans got to see it. And people around the country, including my parents, who'd been Republicans, who were like, absolutely unacceptable to lie to the American people. He's a liar. He's out, as far as we're concerned. We can't have a liar. And I thought, if we can get the evidence in front of Americans across the board in a bipartisan way, let us decide. Let us see it. We're the real jury. And so that's really what I was pushing for, was exposure, open democracy, let the people decide.
Yeah. Well, it certainly became much more of a question that people were talking about. Do you know what I mean? And it was very effective in that way for sure.
Well, we had 8 million people who signed up to work for it. And we spent 2 years going around doing things online, but also having, meetings around the country.
Yeah. And, you're going to always have that 8 million people are kind of who agree with you. But I also think that it kind of raised a seed of doubt for people who may not have thought about things before too. So it has that kind of intangible effect in terms of getting people to question things that they may not have otherwise questioned. I was definitely thinking that, in the time leading up to your decision to become a presidential candidate yourself, how did you make that decision, and what kind of people, who gave you advice on that about whether or not to throw your hat in the ring, whether you were going to participate in that process?
Well, Malcolm, as you know, there was, I think, 23 people running for president on the day.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And I was really late coming in.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to make sure that in this campaign, we talked about the things that I thought might not get talked about, that I thought were critical for America to face. And I actually feel incredibly good about what happened, because I came out and said, I am a climate candidate. It's my number one issue. I was worried as heck that we weren't going to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so, I really wanted to have that happen. I wanted to talk about race. I felt as if we have systemic racism. We'll never get over it unless we first talk about it, understand it together, and then address it. I think people were talking a lot about economic inequality, but I felt as if there were huge, unspoken and unaddressed issues. And then I think, for whatever reason, the Democratic Party and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris very much came through and started to address climate in a very effective, progressive way, started to talk much more. And, lots of stuff happened. There was the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
I'd been talking about reparations for descendants of enslaved Americans. But, George Floyd blew that issue out.
Yeah.
I think the climate, we all live in California. I presume everybody on here, the overwhelmingly lives in California. We just went through this incredible wildfire season. We had the worst, series of hurricanes in American history in the Gulf this year. So, some of the things I was talking about events brought them to the fore as well.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure, the same way as in impeachment, that Americans got to hear the truth. I wanted to make sure that the things that I thought were critical for us as a society were talked about openly and addressed. And I feel very, very good about how this new administration is dealing with them.
Yeah, I was really worried about climate just slipping through the cracks too. I just think it's such an important issue for our time. When you were preparing for the president, how did you prepare for presidential debates? How did you does the government give you any briefing on how to be a candidate?
Because, I have spent a lot of time thinking about policy.
Yeah.
So, but there are lots of things, but there's a lot of policies. So going back and making sure you do your homework is a big part of this, and understanding, exactly not just what the issues are, but kind of where you stand on those issues and how to talk about them. There's a lot of preparation that goes into those debates, and it seems pretty simple, but I promise you that I put in hours and hours and hours for every one of those debates.
Yeah, and I can imagine you don't know what's going to be on the test, so you have to prepare for everything. Were you nervous or were you just so kind of ready to get it done that it was?
Well, it's sort of funny because I definitely had a lot of adrenaline for them. And, I played a lot of sports as a kid, and it's a lot like a game to me,
yeah.
in terms of how you feel. It's like, you have to go out and play your high school rival. You have to go out and you have your league games in college, and you have to win them. So here we go. Next 3 hours, here we go. This really counts. And, I can remember, honestly, games I played when I was 20 years old, as well as I can remember those presidential debates. You're just keyed up, and you'd like to do a good job, and you think it matters. And so it's kind of, I liked it. Like, my attitude is, if you're not a little scared, you're not totally alive. You want to feel like there's something at stake in your life.
I think that's exactly, I mean, almost I can remember just that thought in my head, put me in, coach. Do you know what I mean? Just like, you know, I'll shoot the free throw, or I'll give me the ball. But yeah, definitely. I felt like that when I was looking at you. That's what I thought. I thought that's where I thought you were mentally too. You know, I mean, there's those high moments of just like where you're under intense scrutiny by millions of people. But on the campaign trail, I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like, what was daily life like? What kind of people did you meet? I mean, what were some of the things? I mean, did you meet just some like people that influenced how you look at things? You know, what was that like on a kind of a daily basis?
Well, you know, obviously the debates are highly pressurized, but honestly, seeing people face to face was probably the biggest privilege of my life. And it's hard to overestimate. And Malcolm, I'm sure you get this privilege because you get to talk as a priest, you get to talk to people on the most serious parts of their life and death and marriage and having kids, you know, like the most central primitive parts of their lives. Yeah. So you know this is true. But I'll tell you a story. You know, my daughter, Evie, who's 29 years old, took off a couple of months to go door to door on the campaign. And when it was over, I said, so Ev, what'd you think? And she said, I loved it. People were more honest with me at the doors than I think they are with their best friends and maybe with their families. Yeah. Every day, I would get into a conversation with someone who I'd never met at the door. They would cry, and then I would cry. And she said, it made me a better person, and it made me more religious. Yeah. And I said, Ev, how can you be more religious? You don't even believe in God. And she said, but I do now. It's really profound, Malcolm.
Yeah.
And you know this. I mean, I'm telling somebody who does this for a living, which is relate to people seriously and care about them and listen. I mean, you're someone who you chose this path.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly, I describe it, biggest privilege of my life to sit in a room. And I had this multiple times. For instance, I sat in a room in a small town in Iowa, talking to some mental health nurses. And they were telling me what it's like to be a nurse in a mental health facility and how much they cared about their job, how serious they were about delivering care, how if they got beat up, they'd get fired for not getting back to work fast enough.
Wow.
How poorly they were treated and how deeply they cared. And that happened so many times. People teaching me what their lives look like and showing me, in my mind, how wonderful they are. And I felt like it was such a moving educational experience for me. That to me was the heart of this experience. And it was a fantastic experience. I loved it every day that happened. And it happened every single day, multiple times.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you'd come back and I think you must be exhausted. And you're like, not at all. Let me tell you, I met somebody in South Carolina who said this, or somebody who said this in Iowa. And you're right. There's a way. It reminds me of, Studs Terkel was that writer who would like go and interview Americans. And those books are fascinating to me, even though they're so dated. But for like an instant, like for the year 2020, the beginning of 2019, 2020, you really had a kind of a picture of what America is that's almost impossible to get, I think, in any other way. You have to get out and talk to people in order to really know what it is.
And I really, really enjoyed the people. I think I, of course, saw overwhelmingly Democrats. And I would occasionally run into an extremely hostile person.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
I assumed was a Republican. It happened a few times. But honestly, if they were willing to talk, so they could be extremely hostile, maybe even threatening, I enjoyed it. That doesn't scare me. I'm interested. It's kind of like, let's talk. I'm not scared. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Please. And I would, if someone stood up at one of the campaign, either the need to impeach meetings or a campaign meeting, who was hostile and angry, my attitude was, you definitely get to speak. You don't get to take over, but you get to speak your piece. Let's hear what you have to say and see whether you have to say something reasonable and important for us to hear.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important. And that's one of the things I love about church. It's just like, we didn't invite the people who come. We just get who comes, and everybody makes their contribution in their own different way. And I love that too. It's not like a rarefied clubbish environment where it's anybody who walks in the door is welcome. Yes. And is a really integral part of what it is that we're doing together. One of the things that struck me, just as I was studying to talk to you tonight, I looked at some of the old films of you being interviewed at different things. And one of the things I thought a lot about was just like foreign policy. How did you, what kind of preparation did you need to do? What kind of learning did you need to do in order to begin to understand foreign policy better? Because it's something that we don't have to address as just regular citizens, but which is an important part of being a president.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, Malcolm, I probably spent 30 years as an investor.
Yeah.
And we invested around the world.
Right.
And I traveled around the world.
Yeah.
So when people would talk about China, I mean, I've been to China a bunch of times, different parts, and not just to go sightsee, but to go see what's really going on.
Yeah.
And, that was true of most of the world. So for me, I think understanding our relationships, understanding the history of different parts of the world, was something that I'd done as part of my job and also out of interest, literally for decades. And so that was something where I felt like, funnily enough, my relationships around the world and my experience around the world are a lot deeper than most American politicians.
Yeah.
Because it was like famous. I think George Bush didn't know anything. He'd been the governor of Texas. He didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And I think by and large, American politicians don't, unless they're on one of the Senate or House committees that involves foreign relations, they really don't have that much expertise or experience or knowledge about kind of international trade, how we compete internationally, really what's going on. And I'd also done a ton of climate stuff internationally because it's a global problem. So I'd gone to all the UN conferences and seen how people work. So that wasn't really.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. I wonder if you could
me intimidated.
Yeah, I wonder if you can talk about just other ways that your background kind of prepared you for this. Just for somebody who might not know you, like what's your story that, and how did it bring you to this point,
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's true is, I'd spend a long time in the private sector.
Yeah.
So understanding what actually drives job creation, what actually matters in tax rates, what actually matters in terms of what makes cities, states, countries succeed over time. I've studied that for virtually my entire adult life. Yeah. I mean, if you ask most politicians, how is Japan done in the last 30 years? They have no clue. And no clue why. If you talk about what is going to happen to the United States over the next 20 years economically, it's just not what they do.
Yeah.
And so I look at it and I felt like, wow, you really want to talk about how we're going to succeed? Or do you want to talk in these, very simplistic, sort of stylized political ways of not talking about what's going on? I thought that was something that I felt anytime we started talking about economics, it was like, okay, that's something I know a million times better than you guys.
I was talking to my son who's an economics major just about that. I mean, how crucial it is to have even just a fundamental understanding of trade, for instance, and in order to set trade policy. I'm like, how can you do that without having, a basic education in that?
How do you think, how do you think about jobs and prosperity if you don't have any idea about what creates jobs and prosperity?
Well, unemployment and interest rates and inflation. I mean, if you don't really understand those dynamics, That's why I keep thinking, I mean, the more I talk to you, the more I think we should have like a class for people who are going to enter Congress, like Congress 101 or something.
They do. They really spend a lot of time.
Yeah, I figured they probably do orientation.
But I think, when I think about, I had spent 8 years full time just doing political organizing, Malcolm, before I ran. So it wasn't as if, I'd done Need to Impeach. I'd started NextGen, which is the biggest youth voter mobilization effort in American history. I had traveled around this country. I traveled a lot around our home state of California, meeting people, listening to them from different backgrounds. So, to a large extent, I'd had the immense luxury of being able to go and see what the border looks like. It didn't, and we started, Kat Taylor and I started a bank that lends money to women and people of color specifically, that is dedicated to economic justice and environmental sustainability. Catherine is we've been the CEO of that. And, so that gave me an insight into what drives, I'm not just talking theoretically. I know what's driving those small businesses, because that's what that bank is dedicated to, is supporting businesses in those communities that otherwise can't get funding.
Yeah.
And, we went down, people sometimes ask me, this is a relevant question talking to the Dean of Grace Cathedral, like, do you believe in God? Like, people want to know, who want to know you. One of the key questions for Americans, less so in California, but definitely in California and in every other state, do you believe in God? And I remember I would say to them, yes, I do. And I go to church every Sunday. But Kat and I have been involved with something called California Food for California Kids, which is farm to table in a third of the public schools in California. And if you want to see God, then sometime go see a hungry 8-year-old eat a fish taco on a sunny day in San Diego outside.
Yeah.
That is as close as you're going to get to seeing, goodness, God, delivery of something valuable to an innocent person in the best way.
Yeah. That the care and the love, you're completely right. And that's what human beings long for so deeply, is that connection to the transcendent that we experience when we really connect with another person. And the best way to connect with another person is to help that person or be helped by them. And we all have our moments when we're helpers, and we all have our moments when we're completely dependent. We need to be helped. I love that.
And that's why I said all the things that I was enjoying the most running, that I was enjoying the most in the Need to Impeach campaign, you do in a profound way as an integral part of your job, in terms of relating to people and learning what they're most concerned with in the most personal, intimate, powerful, central parts of their lives.
Yeah, and that's when you say it's the biggest privilege, it's the biggest privilege in my life. And every single day I wake up and I'm like, I can't believe I get to do this. To be with people in moments when they my mother was really worried about me getting ordained. She said, well, you'll spend all these people who are sick and who are dying. And I love it because I can help. There's something I can do for them. I know.
Someone is dying and they want to talk to Malcolm.
Completely.
It's like, oh my gosh,
exactly.
What a compliment is that?
And we're not talking about the 49ers prospects at the Super Bowl for next year. It, like you say, you're at a totally different level of connection.
Yeah. And it's obviously a society that is desperate for that conversation and that connection and that sense of meaning, purpose, and connectedness.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical.
And just in the same way that 8-year-old boy in San Diego is hungry for food, like Americans are hungry for spiritual nourishment. And that's part of like the terrible dilemma of our time. It's something we don't even realize, we don't even talk about. It's like invisible and breaks my heart because I see so many people. Well, I mean, you look at all those, the article in the newspaper about all the kids in Clark County, Nevada, who took their own lives. I mean, there's so many signs of this terrible spiritual sickness. And you know,
And so, and that was, I feel that so strongly, Malcolm, in the sense that as you travel around, you see people who feel so abandoned,
yeah,
who feel as if sort of the institutions and framework and powerful people and elites do not care about them.
yeah,
Have used them, manipulate them, have abandoned them. And that is, of course, that's heartbreaking. They can't have a society, a successful society, a cohesive society where tons of people feel as if the society itself, the leadership, really doesn't care about them. And that is something that was, definitely you can see that traveling across America, people who are hardworking, dedicated, high integrity, high value people saying, I would say, well, who do you really think represents you? I mean, who sticks up for you? Who has your back?
yeah.
And they go, no one. I say, come on, someone must have your back.
Yeah.
Like, nope, we are on our own.
And
It's terrible to hear.
That is the heartbreaking situation. And it's hard to even articulate that, never mind begin to repair it.
Look, I think that's why Joe Biden may turn out to be just a fantastic leader for America.
Yeah.
Honest to gosh, is because maybe he shows concern, caring, vulnerability, empathy for people who feel as if they've been abandoned. If that turns out to be true, and I know that he is a decent person and does feel that way, then that will be a true gift to our country.
Yeah, definitely. Did you get to know the other candidates at all in any way? I mean, I just can't even imagine you being together very much except for the debates, but you may have gotten a sense for them. And
well, there's, there are the debates, but there are what I would describe as cattle calls where, there would be 8 candidates who come and speak in a night. So you're like somewhere in that row.
Right.
And so they're around. So you get a chance to sort of shoot the breeze. And so I would say, yeah, I got a chance to know virtually all the candidates at some level, as a result of being in the same place, doing some of the same things, and, in particular, backstage at the debates.
Yeah. What is your take on that? I mean, takeaway, what did you learn?
Well, I've honestly felt as if those were overwhelmingly high-minded people trying to stand up for what they believed in, ambitious, like wanting to win, but beyond that, wanting to represent.
Yeah.
And, I think to a large extent with that many people, having something to say was critical.
Yeah.
Because, if you think about, I'll choose somebody who I knew most of these people before at some level, and then I got to know them better during the campaign. I think Bernie Sanders is someone who had something he thought was important to say in 2016, felt like he needed to run in 2020 to make that statement even stronger. I mean, the guy had a heart attack,
right,
and was back out there a week later. I mean, and I've said to him repeatedly, I think he made a huge contribution to America.
Yeah.
I think that he brought up and popularized and made people aware about this economic inequality in a way that hadn't happened before. I give him a ton of credit. And I think that people responded to Bernie because they realized, God, he's been saying this forever. He really believes it. He's trying his heart out to stand up for what he believes. And I give him a lot of credit. And I think there were a bunch of people like that who were trying to represent and stand up for what they believed. And, I basically thought it, I respect a lot of those people very much.
Yeah, I'm glad. I can imagine that too. Balancing the ambition and the want, just the desire to serve too. Democracies just don't work if everybody just passively sits at home and don't participate. One of the things that we have at the forum, which you probably remember, is we take questions from the people who write in. So Rebecca's sending me all their questions. So if you're watching, then definitely send us your questions. And I'm going to start going to their questions because they always ask such great questions. So here's the first one that we have. Being a climate activist, successful businessman, and presidential candidate, you seem a natural consideration as a candidate member, specifically head of the EPA. If asked, would you consider that position the best use of your talents at this time?
Well, I have worked on climate for well over a decade in a variety of ways. And I'm going to be working on climate going forward because obviously it's a huge challenge for our society and for the whole world. And so, I always am trying to figure out the most impactful way for somebody with my experience to, stand up and make a difference. I will say that the person who has been nominated to be the head of the Environmental Protection Agency is somebody who's an environmental justice champion, an issue about the environment that I've been pushing for over a decade, which is basically the idea that as we deal with pollution and poison and climate, it's really important that we also address environmental injustice. The fact that we've been, as a society, concentrating our poisons in underserved Black and brown communities virtually for as long as anybody can remember.
Yeah.
And that is something that can't go on. So the fact that Michael is the person who they have nominated and who I'm very hopeful will in fact be the head of the EPA is something that works out really well, in my opinion. I'm entirely supportive. Yeah. So, I'm going to try and make sure that I participate and, throw my weight behind the need for urgent climate action. I think that this administration is very focused on that, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And I think they have a very, very strong team that involves the people with direct environmental and climate jobs, but also goes across every, cabinet level department and really throughout the administration. And I think that's entirely appropriate. So I'm very happy with the way this campaign dealt with climate. They ran on it. They advertised on it. They won on it. Yeah. And we saw at NextGen, that was a critical issue in a gigantic move to get young people to turn out at record levels and support Democrats at record levels.
Yeah, I'm just, we didn't even go into it, but the role of NextGen in this election, as you say, it was so close in the Electoral College, it made a huge difference, just that. I mean, it's funny to think that your biggest influence on the election may have been through NextGen, not even through being an actual presidential candidate.
Well, if you look, and going back to 2018, at NextGen, we were entirely focused on trying to make sure that Democrats took over the House of Representatives. Because if you'll remember, going up to that election, Republicans were controlling the White House, the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the Senate. So it was kind of everything.
Yeah.
And it seemed very, very, very scary. So at NextGen, we organized by 38 congressional districts in 11 states, held by Republicans, in 11 states, including California. We doubled the turnout of young people in those 38 districts. Wow. And 33 of them flipped.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And in 2020, we were focused on, we need to make sure on the White House. And so in all those states that were so close, there are a lot of people who can say they made a difference, but NextGen, we got record turnout, even more than 2008 for Barack Obama, higher turnout this year as a percentage by young people. Wow. And in a lot of those states, it was 2-1 Democratic to Republican. So it was a huge, huge change and clearly difference maker in those states.
Yeah, that's great. The next question we have is from our friend, Peter Drake. Years ago,
hello, Peter.
Hello, Peter. Years ago, you spoke about the XL pipeline at our MBA reunion. What an unpopular opinion you had with that crowd. And how right you were to talk about sacrificing, quote unquote, good business decisions for the right thing to do for our planet, ! What do you think about Justin Trudeau's comments recently?
Well, let me say, Peter, that I haven't seen what Justin Trudeau, who I know who he is, said about this. He has been a big supporter of pipelines from the oil sands of Alberta.
Yeah.
The two that he's proposed to the Atlantic Ocean, two that he's proposed to the Pacific Ocean through his home country of Canada, none of which have gone through, all of which have been blocked.
Yeah.
And I know that he also is in favor of the pipeline that goes through the United States of America to the Gulf of Mexico that will get his oil sands to a world market. So yes, I understand in the past what he's had to say. Let me say something else too. This is not just some oil deposit in Alberta. This is the third biggest oil deposit in the world. It's very dirty oil. If in fact a pipeline connects it to the world market, then Canada will be fighting to have this huge oil reserve developed forever. It can't happen. Strategically for the world, that oil has to stay in the ground.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't just fighting to block the Keystone XL pipeline because it's just another pipeline. That was a strategic point for the world. And it was important. And then Barack Obama did block it. And of course, Joe Biden just re-blocked it.
Yeah.
But there's something going on here, which is we need to move to clean energy. We will create more jobs doing it. We do need to rebuild this country. This is a way to rebuild the middle class with all of those dispersed millions of good paying union jobs. But we also can't destroy the world. And we can't let people argue that their interests in making money from extracting oil and gas is worth destroying the world.
Yeah.
And so I pushed for it then. I think it's kind of like Mr. Trump showing up and, inciting a mob to attack the Congress of the United States violently. It's like, yeah, that's what was always going on, but now we can see it. There was this, of course, I talked earlier about the terrible fires in California. I don't know how many times, but I saw today a story in the paper saying, oh my gosh, all of the glaciers are melting much faster than anyone could ever have expected. We're at more risk than we ever knew. It's kind of like they should just put that story on a loop and run it every 2 months because scientists keep saying the exact same thing. Yeah. We can't afford to do what we've been doing if we expect to survive. And thank God we've got an administration who understands that and knows that we can use this to undo the environmental injustice, create millions of jobs, and create new industries. And California better be at the front of those clean energy industries, because otherwise we may save the world, but the jobs are going to be created in China or Europe. And I'm a homer for the United States. I want us to succeed.
Yeah.
I want my home state to succeed. I want my country to succeed. I want my country people to succeed. And so let's get out there and succeed and compete.
Yeah, definitely. Here's another question. Would you be a consultant for the Biden administration on any particular subject or subjects? If so, what is the subject or subjects?
Look, the things that I've worked on for the last 10 years have really revolved around climate, environmental, racial, and economic justice. And I do have, a 30-year history in the private sector, and I did co-chair the task force on economic and jobs recovery in California.
Right.
And to me, the funny thing is, Malcolm, I don't separate those things. Climate is a justice issue. That's what I was trying to say. If you go to the places where you can't breathe the air, or Flint, Michigan, where you can't drink the water, or big parts of the Central Valley where you can't drink the water, and look at who lives there, they're overwhelmingly Black and brown people. And so I don't think you can separate climate from economic and racial justice. I don't think you can separate job creation from climate and economic and racial justice. To me, if you're going to address these things, you have to address them together. These are interlocking, and to the extent you deal with them in a siloed basis, you don't really deal with them. And to be honest, last thing I'll say is this: I don't think we address these issues in an effective and significant way unless we deal with the issue that you are talking about. What is the framework and the value system that America stands for? What are we doing together in creating this country? Why are we walking the earth?
Yeah.
What is the meaning of your life? And I think that unless we're dealing on that plane, then it is just a question about interest,
Yeah.
as opposed to value. And we need a society that's value driven, that understands what we're trying to create together, that it's not just selfishness, that we're actually trying to create something better for each other and for the future.
Yeah, exactly. And for the future, I mean, to care for the planet, as a gift to the future, so that things won't inevitably get worse. And yeah, we have so many questions. So here's the next question. How can we best participate with and shape the Biden-Harris climate agenda? What are the key aspects of creating a viable climate future? And what are the key components of a viable climate justice future for the San Francisco Bay Area?
That's a lot of questions.
That is a lot of questions.
I think that, look, that's what NextGen is partially about, that, because it's not an organization that just, we've always said we're not going to show up the month before an election and say to everybody, we're here to help you. If you do that, everybody knows you're here to help yourself.
Yeah.
We want your vote because it's important to us, not because we're here to help you. And so when I think about climate, there's really a question of making sure that we support the good decisions and advocate that we're pushing for, really so that they know there's political support for progressive action, and I think participating in that ongoing way through advocacy organizations is really important. And I'll give you one political reason, piece of evidence to how that works. Joe Biden had a minus 22% approval rating with young people in May of 2020, minus 22. Mm-hmm. They ran a very aggressive, progressive campaign on climate directly, and NextGen pushed it really hard to young people. By October of 2020, so whatever that is, 4 or 5 months later, he had a plus 23 approval rating.
Wow.
And so if you think about what moved, if you do age group changes between May and October, no other age cohort moved more than 1% or 2%. This is 45%. So if it was the right thing to do. It was an important thing to do. It was the right thing to do politically. And that's the kind of way you get real action, showing that not only you have to show it is right, it is important, it's also politically effective. Right. And getting that trio of facts to come together is how you get real action in politics.
So here's a question: Do you have an interest in serving in the Senate? There's a lot of questions, by the way. You're a very popular person to ask questions of.
I honestly know that I will be working on the same exact issues that I've been working on for more than a decade. And, and in fact, when I sit here and think about it, the only question I've ever asked Malcolm, and no one ever thinks that this is, the way I really think, but it is actually the way I think, is what can I do that will have a differential impact on what things happen? So, in terms of the EPA, would I be happy to work in the EPA? Sure, I would, but they have a very good person. And so I feel as if, okay, for me, I want to work at that nexus of justice and values and climate and business, because there's no way to separate all those things. When I look at California, do we have to get climate right? Absolutely. We've been leading on pollution since 1970 at least. The EPA, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act came out of California. Building codes came out of California. We've been pushing the CAFE standards, the miles per gallon standards for the whole country. California's been, so do we need to do that? Sure we do. But do we also need to create the businesses that will take advantage of that? The number 2 export from California is electric cars.
Yeah.
We need to be pushing on this from a business standpoint. We need to be pushing on this from a justice standpoint. And so, I'm very, very driven by that. But let me say one more thing. I look back to see why did I push so hard against Donald Trump? Why did I push so hard for climate action? Why have I pushed on environmental and racial and economic justice? Why do I care about an 8-year-old eating a fish taco in the sun? Why? And the answer is, I don't like cruelty.
Yeah.
I don't like it. It's not something that's like someone programmed me to like or not like, or it's smart or it's manipulative or anything else. I don't like it. And when I see it, I push back as hard as I possibly can. And that is something, there's a lot of cruelty out there. Donald Trump is a cruel man. He really is. Yeah. And he was willing to be cruel to Americans. And I didn't like it at all. And I don't like it. And if you think about climate, there's a chance for untold human suffering of the most innocent people on the planet. And it's not okay with me. And I'm going to push really hard in my life to stand up against cruelty, particularly against vulnerable and innocent people. And it motivates. You can tell I care about this a lot.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Right. I remember just having an aha moment. I working on the Millennium Development Goals from the United Nations, where they basically said it is entirely possible to eliminate global poverty, and it is. So what happens is that becomes a choice that human society has made, that appalls me. When you talk about cruelty, that's what I think of too. Is all of us need to have these kind of come to Jesus moments where we just realize that the world we inherited just doesn't have to be that way. Do you know what I mean?
Well, Malcolm, I had this experience, and I don't know if I ever told you. So I think literally maybe 3 years ago, I was down in San Diego, and I was talking to 2 35-year-old corporate lawyers, having a drink at like 5 o'clock, both of them mothers. So 35 corporate lawyers, mothers, who volunteer 20 hours a week pro bono to represent trafficked women.
Oh, wow.
So if you're 35 corporate lawyer with kids, you have 0 seconds free.
Yeah.
You have about 150% of your time allocated to stuff you absolutely have to do. And they somehow managed to find 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
And they were telling me really why they were representing these girls and young women. And it's like, absolutely. I mean, I was so moved because they felt they could not abide that level of intentional, consistent cruelty to innocent young people.
Yeah.
And I feel the same.
But when I meet people like that, they just give me so much hope for the future. People doing their own ministry in their own ways and using the gifts and abilities that they have.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I mean, that to me, people would ask me on the campaign trail, who do you admire? I'd say those people.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
They're doing it because they feel they have to do that to live with themselves. And my gosh, what a great service they're giving to other people and doing that, trying to stand up for people who are being, unconscionably abused.
Yeah. It reminds me of the mental health professionals you're talking about in Iowa.
I know. I mean, that's who I look up to, the people, because they're not doing it because they're going to be on the front page of
Time magazine.
They're doing it because they really, really, really care about other people and want to, take a stand.
Yeah. So here's another question from our audience. What are your advocacy priorities going to be for the next 4 years? Good question.
That is a great question. I know we'll keep pushing other things I said. I've thought about some new things. Look, it turns out what I like advocating against are organized, consistent, accepted things that just aren't right.
Yeah.
When I was originally started pushing on environmental justice, those were terms people had never heard of. The people in the communities darn well knew it. They darn well knew it, but it was not broadly spoken in the environmental movement or across society. You know, I think when I started pushing on the need to impeach, people really thought that I had some like subliminal or hidden agenda. I had no hidden agenda. There was something wrong. There was a power in society working against the interests in trying to hurt Americans. And so, you know, that's what I'm really interested in. The things that we're not questioning that are absolutely threatening to the safety and health and well-being of people, especially vulnerable and innocent people.
Here's a great question from somebody I really admire. I don't know if she wants me to say her name, but her name is Nicole Stahl.
Well, there you go, Malcolm.
I gave it up. But here's her question. I love this question. So Nicole, can you give us an example of a mind changed through conversation during your campaign, either yours or the person you were talking to? I love that question.
Well, I mean, let's see. I definitely came to understand in a way that I don't think I ever had before how much difference, how everyday Americans feel abandoned. I mean, when I talk about those nurses, a lot of times with nurses, I hate to say it, but that is a group of people who are very dedicated to helping other people, very dedicated to their patients, who really give of themselves in a, you know, I think a extremely admirable way, and who feel very, very alone.
Yeah.
And I think that I got an opportunity to learn and understand much, much better different parts of the country. I mean, I'd really never spent a lot of time in the South. Of course, I'd been there, but I'd really having a chance to spend time in South Carolina and Georgia and North Carolina and really talking to people there definitely changed my mind about how society is structured, how people are attitude. It also, and you know, I got to go to an awful lot of Black churches.
Oh yeah, right.
And it gave me such an appreciation for the way that they, you know, participate in their spiritual life, in the way that that spiritual life feeds them day to day, and then thinking about how it has supported African Americans through immense suffering.
Yeah.
And has somehow enabled that community to come through in a really positive way. Very, very hard to do.
Yeah.
So I felt as if, I don't know that it changed my mind, but it definitely deepened my understanding about other people's lives, other people's values. You know, I think that if I was changing people's minds, it was by bringing up things closer to the, you know, into their consciousness that they were aware of, but weren't paying a lot of attention to.
Yeah.
And, you know, I put climate in there. I mean, I really do feel as if people weren't talking about race explicitly until I got into the campaign. And which is, I mean, it seems crazy, but I feel as if there is a need to talk about race and racial injustice and our history and what we can do to repair it going forward. That as a society, I mean, if we're going to be the society we want to be, that's right at the heart of us moving forward in a positive way. And I think that it starts by acknowledging some of the terrible things that have gone on and that continue to go on. And, you know, that is the first step towards moving on together in a healthy way. And so, you know, I hope that I was able to bring up to some people in a way they could hear. Because, you know, Malcolm, and you know this as somebody who, I mean, you give a sermon all the time and you talk to people intimately all the time. And the question is not just what do you say, but what can people hear?
Yeah.
And how can you say it in a way that they can hear it and take it in, and it can move them to a new place. And, that's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't believe it. I mean, I look at the time and our time is done. I feel like we're just starting the conversation, but I'm so grateful to you, Tom. I mean, I just know how busy you are with everything. And, just as you were going through all this, I did have so many questions, and it's such a blessing to hear just what you've been up to. And I didn't even have a chance to ask you about the commission that you're on for, the Economic Commission for California. I feel like we'll have a zillion questions about that, but we have to save that for next time.
Well, let me say, Malcolm, I really miss being at Grace.
Yeah.
I did go over last week to see the installation, and I was there for maybe 15 minutes, and it just brought home to me how much I miss being there for the 6 every Sunday, how much I miss seeing you and all the other people there and the other parishioners, and really what a central part of my life Grace has been. How much I enjoy it and how much it gives me a framework and a meaning for the rest of the things I do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. We're already starting to plan like what kind of celebrations we're going to have when we can all gather
Really?
again. Yeah, we totally are. It's called the September 2021 memo. So the timing might not be right, but we're talking about, how will we celebrate when being able to be together again? Because it's killing me. I tell you, I miss everybody so much.
Me too.
Well, next week, we'll be hearing from Hillary Pennington. She is the Ford Foundation's Executive Vice President for Program, with a special focus on strengthening social justice organizations. And we'll be talking about the role of philanthropy and helping to heal our divided country. You can help us bring the arts to life at Grace with a gift to the forum. Please text Grace to 76278 or visit gracecathedral.org/give to Grace. And Tom, I can't wait to see you in person. It's been a few months since I actually saw you. I hope it's not too much longer till
we ran into each other on the street.
I know, that's great, huh?
Yes.
So cool.
I really look forward to it too, Malcolm.
Yeah, me too. And thanks so much for being here tonight. And take care, everybody. God bless you and God keep you. Good night.